Ya Ali Madad, I'm honored to be here with Professor Hanif Kara. Hanif is a structural engineer, and he's also a professor in the practice of architectural technology at the Harvard Graduate School of Design. Hanif is the design director and a co-founder of the AKT2. His firm has won hundreds of awards, and Hanif was recently honored with the Officer of the British Empire Award. Congratulations, Hanif.
Thank you very much.
Hanif has served on the Aga Khan Award for Architecture Steering Committee and the Master Jury, and he is the structural engineer for the Ismaili Center, Houston. Hanif is a unique innovator. He connects design, research, practice, and education, and we're delighted that he has graciously accepted to deliver the 2024 Diversity and Pluralism in Architecture Lecture at the Kennesaw State University in Georgia. This lecture is in partnership with the Ismaili Council for the Southeastern United States. Hanif, we welcome you and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank the Council for thinking of me to bring me all this way to. I look forward to giving the lecture this evening.
Given your involvement with the Aga Khan Award for Architecture, what impact do you say that this international prestigious award has had on the architectural landscape in the Muslim world? And how does it encourage or how does it highlight some of the key ethical principles of Islam?
Well, the first thing to say is that I've been fortunate enough to be involved for just over half its life. So one of its most important things is it's just over 40 years old, which most buildings aren't. So it has had an enormous history, and the impact of something that lasts that long on anything is pretty important and pretty good. So one is it's timeless, and it's always had the criteria that they set out right at the beginning: deliver every 3 years something that is contemporary and new for that particular cycle. So the impact it's had has been in parallel with the way the world has changed. Population has grown in not only the Islamic world, but everywhere. Technology has changed dramatically in those 40 years. So it has taken on board all of those aspects of life and then put them through the architecture field, let's say, or the discipline. I think it's also particularly important that it treats architecture with a capital A rather than only the architect in that world. So it has always looked at the expansive impact that the built environment has on the quality of life, and who originated the project, who delivered it, what craftsmen were involved. So it's held on to the ancient values that create life or improve the quality of life, which today is becoming more and more significant, is more and more important. And probably the third thing I would say is it's impacted not only the practice of professional architecture, but the education, the curriculums, because it's not in isolation that Imam created the award. He created it also with many of his colleagues in terms of academies, places to study, and the programs that he created for education. So it's linked to education not only in architecture but in general. I think is magnanimous. You can't really find things like that. Even when I travel everywhere, even today landing here, meeting some people who've been through the Aga Khan program, some people who have won the prize, or something has happened to change not only their life but the outcome of the winning of that award. Those are the things that I think it impacts on, but it also has impact on those of us who have been involved, who have been fortunate enough, because not only because of who our chairman has been, but also the way the structure is set up between the steering committee and the master jury and the reviewers. There are 3 layers of people involved, and they constantly change. So we have the steering committee level where the discussions are directly with Imam often, but amongst the steering committee are the highest achievers of their particular discipline. So the conversations and the kind of staking out of what is relevant for a particular cycle has been educational, transformational, because even those of us who think we're experts in our field suddenly learn a lot more through those conversations and know how little we know, and actually take on the award as part of our life from there on. So I've seen this change in people through the steering committee and master jury in the way they operate in the world, whether they're teaching, talking about work or building or designing architecture. I've seen many of my colleagues transformed in the time that I've been involved and continue to promote the whole idea to take it back to its essence, which is quality of life.
Thank you. What about some of the ethical underpinnings of Islam? How has the award highlighted that, or how does it exemplify that?
Yeah, I think it does it through a very natural process. So, architecture sediments certain things and certain types depending where you are in the world. It can be in a slum, or it can be in a city or an expensive place. I think what the award does is it kind of, to some extent, is blind to those inequities and is looking for what impact a particular project, however small, however big, however difficult, has had on improving a particular situation that a community is in, or the direction that a particular region might be taking on, say, tall buildings. Even it's awarded tall buildings, so that the ethical questions about environment or energy or symbolism that comes from these types of buildings have been dealt with through winning awards, and therefore those awards becoming technical question marks or allowing a discourse around that type or the community, or what I would call the silent majorities who build buildings often in some areas of the world. The award has pulled them out and actually shown them, and therefore taken responsibility, I would say, to ethically develop not only its own framework but the people that are affected by it. I would hope that it's also affected our own community by watching this, cycle after cycle, how we have managed to expand despite being a small community through this particular rigor and through this particular approach, expand our footprint in the world, not just physically, but also of the way in which the world thinks of us now. So I think there are a number of ethical positions in there that bring us together again through the awards that take place.
Thank you, Hanif. What about, you've mentioned how the award has changed those whom it has touched. How has the award itself evolved since its inception in 1977?
Well, the interesting thing is, it's I once kind of referred to it as a message in a bottle, 40 years ago, in the hope that the bottle will land in different places at different times and a different message would come. I referred to it as that at one of the seminars we had at an award ceremony. And I thought about whether it was the right approach to take, because in some ways that's an artificial approach, but the organic, natural approach is it seeded a position. It seeded a position right at the beginning, and from the seed of how, as Imam said, chaired it, but also created the steering committee and the layers and the rigor of the process. In order for you to be nominated and win, it's a lengthy process. The discourse that you go through and the output at each stage expands enormously. So it's been naturally seeded in that way. So year after year or cycle after cycle, that particular seedling, I think, has expanded as human population grows, as we learn more about each other, as we find out more about other parts of the world. And I think it's adapted to that, which is potentially or most probably because of the way it was conceived right at the building, first construction stage. So it's kind of been able to change and adapt to the changing circumstances, which even doesn't happen in buildings often, as we know. They break after 25 years or 10 years, or they leak or something. I think the award has, speaking metaphorically, not done that. honest. It's kind of managed to stay straight on the direction that it set out. It's also, I think, got far more exposure in mainstream media, far more exposure in other parts of the world other than Islamic, those that we touch nearby. It has had to take on the whole diaspora in the last 20 years as Muslims have moved to the West and many other parts of the world where they're a minority. The award has accommodated that. It has taken on revolutionary designs that people are trying to now come up with in order to save the planet, be it a climatic response or improving a particular slum with sewage systems and so on and so on. So I think it's been strong enough to be able to adapt and grow muscles every cycle and reinvent itself every cycle, and long may it continue.
Inshallah.
Inshallah.
I'd love if you could share some examples of public spaces and buildings within the AKDN umbrella that are your favorites, maybe one or two, and how they illustrate the richness of Muslim architecture.
I think that the obvious examples, and it is a very difficult question to answer because it's kind of a cliche, because we're first of all implying there is a Muslim or Islamic architecture. And then we're saying, well, we've been able to replicate it in a place that is not. So if we took some of our gardens in Canada, the climate isn't like it is at Agra or somewhere else. That said, some of the components of both the gardens in the Ismaili Center and the other garden that we've done in Canada, to me are phenomenally interesting in the way they have actually, let's say, they've been delivered in most impossible circumstances. Everybody's quoted is the northernmost garden in the world or on the planet, and yet its components are about a climate that is very different. So I'm quite impressed technically by those things, but equally the restoration of Al-Azhar Park to this day, for me, stands from the Historic Cities program, stands as a world-class exemplar in terms of how things can be done, how they should be done, how they refer to culture, how they refer to religion seamlessly. And then we go to Humayun's tomb, where we have done restorations everywhere, all those acupuncture developments that we've done. The whole that has come out of that is phenomenal. And it even the new generations, when kids walk around it, you see them light up. So I think I don't have a particular favorite. I just have complete understanding of anything that I question has been answered by some of these things when I had the fortunate opportunity to go and visit them.
As we look forward to the opening of the very first Ismaili Center in the United States, help us understand how this center in Houston embodies what some may call pluralistic architecture, and how and why that might be necessary to meet current and future global challenges.
You know, I think it's a very interesting but difficult question, because pluralism and pluralistic are constructs of psychology, philosophy, and different aspects of life, and philosophical and political arguments. To directly transfer pluralism to a building is a lot more difficult. It's a lot more difficult because of the physical nature of a building. So there are two aspects to this. The Ismaili Center without any question, the Ismaili Center in Houston, we had during the competition those conversations early on, because for those who know, it was a competition between 5 teams, and we had to come up with what we think the Ismaili centers should be. And we had these discussions about what are the things that we can find in Ismaili centers through visiting them that connect us to a greater place. What are the things? Because don't forget, not all of these people that were competing were Ismailis, but we were all architects or a particular design type, like me as a design engineer. So you find that there are moments in the building that are about geometry. There's a clear discussion that comes out of a speech that Imam gave back in '79 at Central Asia, where we kept reading it, and one of the things that he was talking about is serenity, environment, mood, that comes in existing ancient Islamic buildings, which comes from the idea of not only geometry and symmetry and patterns, but also how those things can have an impact on our spirituality. So we were looking for these in those places, and therefore you see a very smart outcome on a site that has physical issues with flooding, of where we located it, but also when you come to the volumes of the building, how each one is in itself a place, and how each one itself connects both to the physical and your spiritual aspects, whether you're in the education part or the prayer part or in the social whole. I think every one of them has a signal that tries to connect you to the higher place. For example, very quick example, the prayer room is an enormous structural span, to keep it clear. So for those who don't understand it, it's like a football pitch scale trampoline. But the transfer system that the architect and us developed is 7 squares that rotate, referring back to the 7 heavens of Islam. So all of those things kind of fell in place once we set the geometry and tried to solve them, because architecture is something, and engineering, that solves problems. But they were kind of in the brief that we were given. And when you start to interrogate the brief, connect it back to some of the speeches, some of the Aga Khan centers, some of the community discussions we have, I think much of this will manifest itself not only in the whole of the Ismaili Center, but also in parts of it, through the patterns, through the way the air comes in and out, but also as it zooms out, because the landscape is an incredible piece of work as well by Thomas Walsh. So you have 2 eminent architects, Farshid Musavi, a female, who happen to also see things slightly differently to the way previous architects might have seen about Ismaili centers because of her own difference, and Thomas, who had studied quite a lot because he had been sent by Imam at some point to go and visit places to try and learn from them what is it that makes it relevant for an Ismaili center to Islam or to our own spiritualities, and how we behave in a Jamaat Khana.
As a structural engineer, you play a very pivotal role. So help us understand what a structural engineer does, and what kind of role is that in such an architectural marvel such as the Ismaili Center?
I think it's, in the politest way to put it, is the separation of disciplines at some point after Enlightenment created a major problem. And thankfully, we have an Imam who pointed at that often. It took us many years to do degrees and study about this, but one of the things that he tried to do, I think, at least my reading of it, is bring it together again. So don't separate the engineer from the place, don't separate the architect, don't separate the landscape. Bring it all together, which is kind of pluralism of sorts. Bring the disciplines back. We call it interdisciplinarity. So the role that one gets to play in that game, let's say, or to respond, is first of all to try and understand what's being said, and understand what's been said not only in the far away past, but the recent past, where we have an Imam who's currently telling us what we should be thinking, and then also the predictions that are implied in the near future. So in the case of the Ismaili Center in Houston, the role of the structural engineer was to sit with the design team, create a competitive outcome that responds well not only to the brief, which is largely a volumetric quantitative exercise, but what are the qualitative things we can bring into it. And one of that sort of moves for a structural engineer is to encourage the other 2 disciplines often to push themselves whilst they're pushing you. So I found myself, deeply engaged with all the moves that were being made, not just playing the role that's expected of me, which is knowledge about how to make buildings stand up, or how to construct a building, how long it will take. All those things were pretty simple. We know how to do that, all of us. But the questions we were being asked by this site, this brief and this client, and we don't forget we had to present to Imam and Prince Amin at some point, was that this is how can we elevate ourselves to a point where each one of our disciplines has something very special to add to the building. And I can say that, let's see, we have a few more months before we finish. I'm relatively confident that we have delivered all the things we promised to deliver to the questions we were asked and more. So we often went beyond our comfort zones in order to make sure we did not disappoint the patrons, because we went through a very rigorous process of actually not being selected, but beyond selection, we had to keep presenting and being told where we think we got something wrong, pointed at to say, you could do that differently. Not being told how to do it ever, but always being pushed. And I think even for an engineer sitting in that audience, it was not only exciting and frightening, but at the same time it was almost as though you were being kind of relinquished of your responsibility as a scientist and allowed to be a human being again in that situation, in order to improve the life of those that will use the building and your patrons to enjoy that as well.
Can you share with us one challenge that your team faced and an innovative solution that you all came up with?
There are quite a lot, because one of the benefits of working like this and allowing a team to develop it without the quantification or the value engineering that comes with projects always, one of the advantages of that is that we are freer to think about it. So we have a number of very important things that I don't want to spoil the surprise, that respond directly, and there are a number that are indirect. If I give one example, it would probably, just for the moment, it would be the idea of the 49 columns that support the roof because of the Imam, the 49th Imam. That came out of the design process. So you will see that there are some very special columns that only support the external sky, the protection from the sky, but so they're not internal spaces ever. They're spaces that take you up above the roof. So it's always open to the atmosphere and to the sky, but there's a covering. And there are exactly 49 columns that do that. So that would be one example, because it's not just about selecting the number. How do you make them special? What is the speciality that comes? And to do that within the context of construction in the USA, and within the context of a budget, within the context of committees that we have to also satisfy, was challenging. But having seen all of the columns yesterday myself in my final kind of inspection, I think it worked. I think we pulled it off. That would be one example of many.
So here's maybe a personal question. How has the Ismaili Center bridged Deen and Dunya for you? What I mean is, how have you taken structural design engineering and merged that with your own spirituality in the design of this center?
Well, if one was able to answer that, it would be quite emotional, let's say. So to try and avoid the emotion, if I can say that it's not been about just doing the Ismaili Center and how that connects to my spirituality. For me, it's come as part of the punctuation as I grow as a human being from the time I've been involved and from the time I created my own practice, staying with what I was confident with and learning from the steering committees, the colleagues and so on, that then comes together into proving that we weren't just talking and listening. We can do projects. We can actually satisfy the things we've learned beyond what the brief says. And I felt quite confident that the spatiality, but also the specialness of what has come out of that process wasn't a singular moment in the building. It's the whole project in itself and the interactions with everybody, including the Jamaat in the USA. I give this example all the time because for us as designers sitting there listening to the young Jamaat telling us what they wanted in the building, I will never forget that the architect at some point said to me, any one of these kids could be the next president of the USA. To me, that was a connection back to my own soul, thinking, I came as a young person to the UK. Isn't it amazing that we as a community can actually enjoy these moments, and it satisfies you that you are in the right direction, in the right journey. So I think it's connected me more. I think it's also made me a little humbler about my achievements, because they are what they are, achievements. But you hope that you can get a link back for the legacy, and you hope you can shape the minds of others. So I can't wait for the moment when I bring my own children to see this, and so they can understand us better. They can try and grasp a bit more about Din and Dunya. So for me, I think it's been a multiple of lessons, which aren't over yet, because remember, I have to wait until it's signed off to be okay before I can say my task was done. And I'm hoping that having achieved that, I will continue on my journey of getting more and more spiritual benefits from it as well.
Inshallah. So Hanif, is there a behind the scenes story that you can share with us of your interactions with Maulana Hazar Imam as it relates to the Ismaili Center Houston?
There are so many. That's again the problem. When you go through I think we spent 3-year process designing with Prince Amin and Hazar Imam. There are so many moments, and I've always regretted not writing them down. But if I was to put my finger on any specific thing, I think there would be 2. One would be the continual encouragement to do better through questioning us, but never giving the answer to us, and never telling us we were ever wrong in anything, but asking enough questions to make us realize often we were wrong. The pattern was wrong, or the scale was wrong, or something was wrong. That would be a kind of a general comment. But a more specific thing for me personally is that I was allowed in the final presentation to deliver certain aspects of the architecture. And one of those was to announce that we could only come up with a scheme that had 49 columns. And at that moment I was able to see Hazar Imam and Prince Amin at the same time, to see, being flattered or what will happen next. And it was just a simple smile and acknowledgement of an engineer being allowed to deliver that, the architect being generous enough to encourage me to bring that in, because it had been an idea that we had discussed together. I think there are many moments like that.
So the Ismaili Center is said to have a 100-year life cycle, and that's because of the longevity and the durability of the materials that have been used in construction. Inshallah, the center will outlive a century. In your mind, or what are your aspirations for the Ismaili Center, both as a member of the team, the architect team, as well as an Ismaili Muslim living in the United States?
My aspirations, first of all, to tackle the question of 100-year design life. It doesn't sound a very long design life, because we think, what's the big deal? But the big deal is most buildings have an imposition of 25 to 50-year life until recent times, because the question of how we treat the planet, which goes all the way back to the mandate on the awards, how buildings can live longer, and how 400 or 500-year-old buildings from our ancient world, and even in the Islamic world in particular, have survived, was critical to the question we were trying to set up for ourselves. So how much life you give to a building that is so important becomes not only a numbers game, because the more life you want to give, the more cost it could be, the longer it could take to design. So one of the fortunate things for us was there was no question from the client side. It was when we put it to them that this is you could choose to do a 50-year life, which would get us out of jail, because we could do materials that were cheaper and so on, or we could attempt a 100-year design life in the knowledge that's the minimum, and it will go further. And then presenting the benefits of that, that it will have many lives as a building, which we see now. It will have a different energy, operational energy equation if you design something for that life. How do you allow for the changing technologies? How do you adapt for the climate change that's going to happen? How do you mitigate some of the problems that we're going to have as the climate changes? All of those things take a completely different dimension when you push it to 100 years. So I'm kind of hopeful or pretty interested in being here when you have a hurricane and to see whether it affects the North Avon in the way that we have predicted. So all the tools have told us how it will behave and how usable these things will be. I think that the community has had or will have over time the benefit of the brief we were given and the way we at least pitched this project to the city, to our community, but also the marker it will set for other buildings in the USA. So I'm particularly hopeful that only certain buildings set benchmarks, and we had no option but to, as a community, despite the fact that we're a pinprick in the USA, we had the responsibility ethically and in terms of value that we have to build something that everybody could refer to as something to reach. And I think that 100-year design life will give it that. I'm pretty confident, even if I say so, that the architecture and the landscape architecture and everything else around it will make it an exemplar where people will come, many students will come to study it. It will get replicated, or elements will get replicated in other building types that we will see in the future. That's my hope.
What about as a Shia Ismaili Muslim? What is your aspiration for what this building will provide?
Well, it provides serenity and the things we all look for in our Ismaili centers, pride and serenity, a kind of reflection. So when you're in it, sometimes built environments shape us to a point, but not go far enough to get to our inner self. And the way we have done this building and our response to even the way you're guided by the light in the building, from the moment you enter to where you want to go, you're always going to be guided by a particular natural light. So this is a surprise that's going to come to people from the social spaces to the Evan. If you want to go into the prayer room, there will be a particular natural direction of natural light. Those kind of things, I think, are refer to our religion in a way, and refer to Shia beliefs about how we live our lives and how we would like to go in here and try and find the inner self as much as possible.
So Hanif, our Imam guides us to make sure that we use our skills, our intellect, our resources to help uplift society in general. And many students who are looking to choose a profession often use that as a criteria. They want to choose a career where they will be able to do more than just provide for themselves and their family, but where they will be able to do greater good.
Mm-hmm.
How does architecture and the professions that surround it, in your case, structural engineering or urban planning or landscape architecture, how do these professions also help with an aspiration to do greater good?
I will be biased about this because I've been a designer all my life. I started with a very technical approach to engineering with oil rigs and roller coasters, went on to buildings. But I've also been fortunate enough to work with some of the greatest architects in the world, with some of the greatest clients in the world. And I would say to younger community members, don't be dismissive about design. It might not make you the bucks in the first 5 years, but over time you will find that you will enrich your quality of life, and the legacy you leave behind is not yours. It's for the people that use the building and the minds that it will shape, but also the disciplines it shapes. So right now, in fact, we are doing a full circle because the climate crisis or climate challenge is bringing the disciplines of agriculture or farming and architecture back to the forefront. Because when we look back at momentous occasions in the history of our world, what happened at these transformative moments in the history, you find out that those two components, the built environment and agriculture, are very relevant. Energy being the current issue and the carbon footprint being the current issue, operational energy. How do we save the planet? How do we touch the earth lightly? These things do a greater good than that is yours. And they also do you some good, as I'm proof of. I couldn't have achieved much of what I've achieved had I not taken this discipline seriously. So I would argue that if you're looking for more purpose and goal, it is not a discipline that you should shun. You won't probably immediately love it, and you might take 7 or 8 years before you get into it. But I would say to those that are thinking about it, take it up. Take it up young, but equally, if you've done another career, there is no harm in coming back to the built environment, serving the communities that we're in, but also serving the things that our people need to do. Where can we help in Afghanistan or Syria through these changes that we can make through architecture and so on. So I would encourage people to look carefully at all the things that we've been told about the impact of the built environment and how we should leave the world behind us for the next generations. They have rights, not just physical rights, but spiritual rights to be given great rewards. So I think the disciplines around architecture and architecture itself needs to recover that agency. It lost some of its way and is beginning to recover some of those agencies. And I think for me the Ismaili Center is one of those fantastic moments where we could start to recover our position by being given an opportunity in a building type that deals with community and life and transgenerational, rather than create artificial briefs for ourselves.
So Hanif, we'll wrap up this interview.
Sure.
But before we do that, I'd love to give you an opportunity to touch base on anything that we may have missed.
I have gained a new dimension to what I perceive to be the Jamaat here. So we shouldn't miss that. We should take credit for that, because I think the Jamaat here has been, despite the fact it's a relatively young Jamaat, has responded impeccably and treated us all in tremendous respect, for which I'm enormously grateful. And I'm also grateful about being invited today, to come here and talk again to the Ismaili Council and a group of students about interdisciplinary discourse and what can be bridged between the community and academy and buildings. So all of these things are covered, in theses, in essays, and so on. But if I was leaving you with that, I would say thank you so much to the community for giving me this particular opportunity.
Well, thank you, Hanif. This has been really incredible.
Thank you.
I appreciate the opportunity. And we're grateful as the Ismaili Council to have you visit us. Kennesaw State as well, our partners, we're grateful to them and for you to be here.
Thank you. Thank you very much.